Hi, Tammy.
I'm back.
Hi, she's back. Welcome. We have 4 people on with us right now. There's a little bit of a lag. There's a little bit of a delay. So I'm going to be keeping track of both.
Okay.
But it's probably about a 5-10 second delay. So there she is. Welcome.
Oh, good. This is working.
Yeah, we figured it out. Oh my goodness. So Dr. Rachel Herz is with us. I'm so thrilled. Allison is here. She had leftover. We were before you joined. We were talking about what people had for lunch today. Entertaining people. So some people had omelets. Some people had a burrito, which is great. So I left the bio for Dr. Herz, but let me just read this to you again. Rachel Herz is a neuroscientist and leading world expert on the psychological science of smell. She's been conducting research on the sense of smell, emotion, perception, motivated behavior, and cognition since 1990. And Dr. Herz is a TEDx speaker, has published 90 original research papers, received numerous awards and grants, co-authored scholarly handbooks, and is an adjunct professor in the medical school of Brown University and part-time faculty in the Department of Psychology and Neuroscientist at Boston College. She's also a professional consultant to various industries regarding scent, taste, food, and flavor, and is frequently called upon as an expert witness in legal cases involving the sense of smell. How cool is that? Her latest book, Why You Eat What You Eat, The Science Behind Our Relationship with Food, explores how our senses, brain, and psychology govern our perception of food, the experiences and consequences of eating. Why You Eat What You Eat was a finalist for the 2018 Readable Feast Awards and listed among the best food books of 2018 by the Smithsonian and the New Yorker. And I have to say, and you're going to hear this in our interview, I loved this book so much. I read it twice and I wrote like 20 pages of notes. So I'm just thrilled that you're here. And Tammy says, yay for perseverance. Thank you, Tammy. I don't give up. I'm a fighter. So I have like a million questions for Rachel, and I asked a lot of them on our interview, which I hope you're going to be tuning in for next week when we start the summit. But if there's any kind of technical difficulties, just please put it in the chat, and I will make sure I'm going to keep an eye on that. So I asked you already like a lot of questions, but there were a few other things that sort of came up for me. And I'm also want to open it up to the group here as we're talking. If you're thinking of questions for her, this is your time. We have her until 3:15. So whatever questions you have about really questions, why you eat the way you eat, what motivates that behavior, and especially our senses, this is the time to ask those questions. So I'm going to get the ball rolling if that's okay. And, there was one thing in your book, you talked about the importance of ambiance. And so I remember one study you were talking about, like in fast food establishments, they have like really bright lights and like loud colors. And then like in nice restaurants, in fancy restaurants, everything is sort of dim lit and quieter. Can you say a little more about why would fast food establishments want to have that? What's the purpose? And then overall, what would be ideal for us in terms of really enjoying our meal and being able to fully appreciate it using all of our senses?
So fast food restaurants capitalize on the term fast food in the way that they create the ambience in their establishments. So bright lights, bright colors, and not very comfortable seating makes you go in and out quickly, because the idea is that you are, first of all, not going to be lingering because this isn't food for fine dining, but also so that they can keep the establishment full with new customers coming in all the time. They don't want you sitting at the table for hours and hours. They want you to eat your hamburger and soda, whatever it is, and then go. So the feeling within the space, the colors, the lights, the decor, everything about it is to encourage movement, and movement in and movement out. So that's why that is the way it's done. It's actually done very deliberately. One of the other things that it does, not only does it make you not really linger, but it also makes us eat more quickly. And as I'm sure you all know, there's problems with eating too quickly because we're often not really paying attention to our experience. We're not getting this sensory and psychological pleasure and fulfillment from eating that we otherwise could, which is another reason why another really bad thing to do, and a lot of fast food restaurants have this, and especially now, this is the only way we can use them, is the drive-through. And so if you're going through the drive-through and you're getting your hamburger or your sandwich or whatever, chances are you're probably going to start eating that when you're in the car. And that's also a bad idea. I'm not even going to talk about possibly having a car accident. I'm just going to talk about the fact that you're doing something else and you're eating. And so really you're not even experiencing the whatever pleasure and quality of the food that you're consuming. So, and that's a real detriment. Now, conversely, when we're in fine dining establishments, they deliberately have low lighting, much more comfortable places to sit and consume food, as well as the fact that usually there's music in the background. And there can be music also often in fast food restaurants. If you ever listen to that music, if you ever kind of clue into that, it's probably going to be quite fast tempo. Now, in fine dining establishments, it tends to be slower tempo, and all these things make us slow down, linger longer, which is actually better for our experience of the food environment and makes us have a more positive experience when we're eating. But it also, from the point of view of the economics of the restaurant, is more likely to make you potentially order more, especially maybe order more drinks. Potentially also, were you going to contemplate having dessert or not? Well, yes, maybe no. Okay, yes, sure, I will, because it's so nice to stay in here, and another coffee, please, and so on. So the longer you stay in those establishments, actually, the more money you spend, which is what every restaurant wants you to spend as much money as possible. But the way the fast food does is to get people in and out, and then more people in and out, sort of continuously kind of revolving door, whereas the fine dining establishment wants you sitting there longer, so you end up ordering more and spending more money that way.
So that's makes a lot of sense. I mean, it really does. And, you know, as you were saying that, I thought about this other part of your book where you talked about, and it kind of goes right into what you were saying about music, which is, and you even like posted a SoundCloud link where like people who, there's like high pitched, it's more sweet, and low sounds is associated with more bitter. Could you say a little bit about that? Because I was like, what? That's crazy. But that's
so this is actually really, really interesting research, and spearheaded, in fact, by Charles Spence, who's at Oxford University in the UK. And he's done a lot of what these kind of cross-modal experiences with food, where you have senses coming from something else. So things you see or things you hear, things you touch, and how that actually influences your perception of taste. Taste specifically, like salt, sour, sweet, and bitter. And what he's found, and other people have used this, actually artists have used this, fine, really, really exclusive restaurants have used this too, is that depending upon the sound that's played, your actual experience of what you're tasting, what you're eating changes. And it turns out that this is maybe not very surprising, because it has to do with these idea of cross-modal correspondence. So we think sweet and high notes. And basically, high notes, when you listen to them, they sound kind of happy. They sound more up. And because sweet is an innately pleasant taste sensation, we consider something sweet and happy, they kind of go together. So there's actually kind of a semantic, psychological reason why those two things go together. Then when you have bitter taste and we have low notes, bitter is actually an inherently unpleasant taste, so that when we're tasting that and we're hearing something low and lugubrious, they kind of go together more in that way as well. But there's an extra layer to that, which I think is incredibly fascinating. And that is, if you try in your own mouth right now to make a high-pitched noise, like woo, like this, you actually kind of make yourself smile by doing it. And if you make a low pitch noise like that, you kind of almost like make your face go into a more frowny expression. And so there's, in fact, a kind of physical correspondence as well with the way that we would be imitating a high pitch noise or a low pitch noise, and the way that they kind of relate to positive or negative emotions.
Oh my God, that's absolutely fascinating to me. I hope you guys are like listening to this and like are as fascinated as I am. And since we have such limited time, I want to make sure that this is the time to like put, from what you've heard so far, if you have like follow-up questions, or if you're like, why is it that every night at 10 p.m. I head right to the fridge, and like, what's the reason behind that? This is the time, because she is, like we said, the leading world expert in this field. And actually, I had as people are coming up with questions, I had a question about your process with your book, because this is one thing I didn't get to ask you in our interview, which is, you're a leading expert in the sense of smell, and I know smell and scent is your particular niche and field and passion. So I was curious, like, is there a personal story around why you ended up writing a whole book about food, and our relationship with food and why we eat what we eat? And so I was curious if there was more of a backstory there as well.
Well, I mean, I've been doing research on smell since the very beginning, but I've also since then started doing research on taste. So taste obviously is also connected. And I've been working on emotion and motivated behavior the whole way through as well. So food and eating is emotion and motivated behavior. And the more personal side of it is I love to eat. And I've always been someone who is very like touchy-feely with food. I was always squeezing bread, touching everything. My mother would always be yelling at me, stop touching all the food. But so I always had a very kind of sensual connection with food. And still, like right now, my favorite thing is to eat with my hands. Like, obviously you need to use knife and fork, when you go out, but depending upon what I'm eating, obviously that would make sense too. But getting in there with my hands has always been something that's really the way that I personally enjoy it the most kind of intimate connection with it. And so just from a personal perspective, just my love of food and my sort of sensory and emotional connection to food is probably the basis of it. But from a research perspective, the work, even though originally and kind of the thread through everything has been the science of our experience of smell. The other side of it, I've also been studying for a long time. So emotion, and actually I've written a whole book about disgust as well, called That's Disgusting. So emotion and taste and food and flavor experience, that's been, running throughout as well.
I really want to do more research myself in disgust, because I've actually worked with some clients whose children have ARFID, for instance, or they have and like I'm really interested in like why certain people reject certain foods, and if it has to do, is it nature or is it nurture? Is it how what the mom ate in while in vitro, or like what's the cause of that? I mean, you don't have to get into it now, but I'm very curious about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, you probably know since you read my book twice that I actually write about ARFID quite a bit, and in fact follow the son of a really good friend of mine who had a very severe case of it. And when he was a child, and then now as a young adult, sort of how he's progressed and what worked for him, and kind of the basis for that, and the emotional kind of substrate to it, which just very briefly, I'm sure is, there's a lot of anxiety. Typically, these children have a lot of anxiety about the world in general, so not just about food, and often a lot of obsessive and compulsive qualities as well. So one aspect of ARFID, which for anyone who doesn't know is avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, which is like extreme picky eating, is their own kind of emotional anxiety and their emotional difficulties. But what was really interesting to me, so Gabe is the name of the kid that I follow, and he's my friend's son. He told me that, because I not only knew him at the time when this was all happening, but I also interviewed him for writing this book. And he told me, because I wanted to ask him a lot about disgust, and he said, it wouldn't have bothered him at all to put a dirty sock in his mouth. He didn't care about like dirt or mud or, if he like licked or whatever. None of that bothered him. The idea that was the most repellent to him was swallowing. So incorporating into his body, like something foreign, he's going to take and it's going to incorporate into his own body. And that's actually something that comes up a lot with the idea of disgust in general, that you're taking the outside and you're bringing it into your inside. And then we're keeping this barrier between the outside and the inside for health and safety a lot of the time. What's interesting to me right now is everything that's been going on with the coronavirus and how much we're hand washing and how much we're sort of sanitizing everything. I'm wondering how this is going to kind of change maybe our experience of disgust and our relationship to the world around us along those lines as well. Interesting.
Absolutely. And I mean, especially because there is such an anxiety component to sickness and illness and fear of germs, and it kind of feeds into a lot of that as well. So like, I think it's funny how, you see across the spectrum, some people who are really lax about it, and other people are like suiting up and putting their hazmat suits on just to go get the mail, So I think it probably is a lot of connection between, our perceptions and thoughts and how we handle stress and our reactivity in general, right? And how we process news and everything.
Right. And there's a personality aspect to this too. I mean, one of the things I have also in my book is It's called the neophobia scale. And it specifically asks about, it's about food and it's how fearful you are of trying new foods. So like, would you be willing to try some dish you'd never heard of or seen before in a new restaurant? Your sort of aptitude to try ethnic cuisine, going out and doing new things specifically around eating. And that actually also really connects to ARFID. So kids who have ARFID are very much, they only want to stick with extremely familiar types of foods, and only ones that they are guaranteed in their own experience are not going to be dangerous to them. It's really, interestingly enough, about danger. And when it comes to the sensory, color is really important too. And white is the color that kids will most accept. So like white bread, crackers, white yogurt, things like that are the foods which are most likely to be acceptable to kids who have ARFID. And that's also, I think, really interesting from the point of view of how color gives us signals about what we're eating. And probably the most sort of neutral color, safest color is white. So if you're afraid of food, white's probably, especially if you're a kid and you don't know, let's say lettuce is healthy and green and you should be eating that, it's better to go on the neutral end of things.
It's funny that you talked about that because I wrote, of course I have questions, and you wrote a lot about color, and that's just so interesting about the familiarity piece of it and just the safety and protection component and that barrier you're discussing. But one of the things that, and I wrote this down because again I'm like, wow, just that the green is often associated with more sour and red is associated with more sweet, and like when people have the certain bowls of certain things, I remember you said like ice cream in certain bowls versus others will be more palatable. And I don't know if you want to say anything about that, but I just find that so interesting because it's so meta. It's like so below the surface.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, did we talk about this in my main
yes, we don't want people to.
Yeah, I think that we did. So maybe we can teaser.
We have one question. Tammy says, I've always joked with my friends saying, I don't have a good smeller. I always assumed it was because I was growing up in a house with 4 smokers and another 2 that visited frequently. This was before people smoked outside. So the question is, does a lack of being able to smell things affect our sense of taste? And I think I know the answer to that, but Rachel's going to answer that, but that's really the basis of our whole interview and everything that she studies, which is, especially as it relates to food, which is that our sense of smell is everything when it comes to our sense of taste, right? So we can just say one little sentence about it.
Yeah, so basically people say the word taste erroneously most of the time. So what you really mean when you say taste, I'm guessing 99.9% of the time, is flavor, because taste is just salty, sour, sweet, and bitter, and everything else we experience while we're eating comes from our nose. So that is to say, there's no taste of chocolate or taste of bacon. In the case of bacon, it would just be the taste of salt, and it's all the aroma of bacon, which is about 150 different volatile chemicals make up the bacon aroma. And what happens is when we're eating, it's the aroma that's coming from our mouth when we're chewing that actually goes up into our nose through a hole in the back of our mouth, and then we're experiencing that scent at the same time as the taste, and we have the experience of the food that we're consuming. So definitely there's an enormous component of smell that goes into eating. And if you find that you're especially attracted to sweet and salty and fatty, creamy foods, that tends to be what happens when people don't have much smell, because those sensations in and of themselves are highly positive also. So, the salt, sugar, fat, well, there's a kind of an evolutionary basis to liking those things. But if we don't get the nuance from the flavor that gives us, tells us the difference between smoked salmon and bacon and chocolate and vanilla and all those kinds of things, which all come from our nose, then people rely more on the sensory aspects. And when it comes to the fatty aspect of it, that's also the feel inside the mouth. So that creamy feeling, which is something that we all also really enjoy. Another feeling with food is when we have like hot peppers and things are spicy. So that kind of burning feeling, that's another dimension of our experience of smells and tastes and food.
So does the fact that she had smokers and she had a lot of secondhand smoke, does that affect her now as an adult?
So no, I mean, interestingly, that definitely would have affected her as a child, because smoke in the environment is a pollutant, and pollution actually kills off the odor receptors, which are in fact in our nose directly exposed to the environment. But we actually get a new nose basically every 28 days, because those cells are continuously turning over and new cells are coming out, because if we didn't have that, we would all lose our sense of smell before we were 5 years old. So it's a function of having new cells constantly being reborn. If she's no longer with smokers, then and not living in a very polluted area, she should have a normal sense of smell, unless there's something else going on. But so she could, I don't know if she's ever been tested. Maybe her sense of smell is better than she thinks it is.
That's so interesting. And she says, she loves fatty foods for sure. And she's addicted to hot foods these days.
And that kind of goes with, maybe she does have a less intense sense of smell. I mean, there's a very big variety across different people, but more people, and actually no one has the identical sense of smell as somebody else, unless you have an identical twin. Because in addition to the fact that we constantly, and there's a lot of fascinating things about the sense of smell. One of them is this constant regeneration. And the other is that we all, in fact, have a unique nose, because the specific genes that are coding for the receptors that are detecting smells are ever so slightly different between every single one of us, except if you have an identical twin.
Wow, that's amazing. It's so interesting to me that it's like snowflakes. We're all like, individual in our own way. But
and not only that, but we all actually smelled uniquely different too, unless you have an identical twin eating the exact same food as you. So your body odor is as unique as your fingerprint, and your ability to smell is also as unique as a fingerprint.
Isn't that about? Yeah, I mean, I could talk to you for hours about this. And then you only have like 3 minutes left. So if there's anybody else who would like to ask a question, go ahead. If not, you're going to need to sign up for the conclave at bit.ly. Actually, I left the link below, and you're going to use that link to sign up. I keep using that. Don't use that link. We're going to use the link below. And not only that, but Rachel and I did an advanced interview where we talk a lot about sensory-specific satiety and some other really exciting, interesting things. Thank you so much for doing this and for coming and doing this meet and greet.
And also how you can actually use like aromatherapy to help you not eat foods that you don't want to eat. So you can almost use it like in a dieting way. So that's also something, I think we talked about that, didn't we, Jenny?
Yes, we did. Yeah. And there was, I had another question for you, and it just out of my head all of a sudden. And it had to do with that, but I'm sure I'll remember in a second. But if anybody else, Tammy says thanks. And she said it's all very interesting, and there's some other people in here leaving nice comments, so thank you guys so much. Go ahead and click the link below. I'm going to put it in 2 different places, so you can go ahead and sign up for your free ticket, and for only $17, and this price is going to go up next Monday, so you're going to want to jump in now. For $17, you can get the advanced sessions, which are going to be more in-depth, kind of more research and more of the science and stuff behind all of this incredibly interesting information and psychology around around smell and taste and sensory pleasures around food, which I'm so obsessed with, and I know that a lot of you are as well. So I think we're good in terms of questions. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we log off?
Well, no, just other than, I love eating and food is wonderful. And I think it's so important what Jenny's doing, and the whole idea about being conscious and present while we eat. That's actually a real thread that runs throughout my book, Why You Eat What You Eat. And about my message with food is that we really need to be present to balance the equation of the pleasure that we get from consumption with whatever else we're getting from consumption. So, the chocolate cake and the French fries and the pizza, all that's great as long as we're actually getting the pleasure that it deserves to have. And as soon as that starts fading away, or we stop paying attention to what we're eating, then we should think about not continuing to eat. But I think what Jenny is doing is really remarkable, and I'm so thrilled to be part of it. So thank you.
Oh, thanks. And the 2 of us are going to go be foodies together once the pandemic is over, and get to use all our senses and go eat something somewhere. So thank you again so much, and we'll see you again next week on the conclave. You can interact with Rachel. You can upvote her talk and all kinds of things. It's really, really interactive, and I can't wait to see all of you there next week. So thanks again, Rachel.
Thank you,
everybody. Bye. Bye.